Welcome to the Painting Insights podcast. We have been working on something in the background.
That's right. We've actually started a Patreon channel. For the last couple of months, we've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
And we have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. Would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Absolutely. I'm Edward Povey and a painter.
Oh, that's very terse. I appreciate that. Lovely. Well,
It is.
I was first fortunate enough to be introduced to you when I was at art school, and you did a talk for the students there. Now, this was over Teams, I believe, which is an equivalent to Zoom at the time, during the lockdown periods of the pandemic. And it was a beacon of hope in an otherwise dark time. Do you have any recollection of that time for students?
That's really nice. I mean, you never know, do you? You just never know at the time the impact you might have on someone.
No.
So I think for professional artists, I think that talking to colleges, talking to graduates, is really important because, you know, a lot of professors are professors. That's their job. They're not necessarily professional in the subject that they're actually teaching. And that's who they really need to hear from. People that have been in that war fighting for their lives. Only they really know the story. Yeah.
That's true. Well, it was incredibly valuable for me, and it's such an honor for me to have you on the podcast. So it's wonderful to see you again. And I was hoping that we could start by discussing this amazing piece behind you. Can you talk to us about, I mean, we do have audio listeners as well to this podcast. So if we can do what we can to help describe to them what we're seeing behind you, because it's an amazing painting.
Yeah, it's a big painting, 2 meters by I think it's 170 centimeters, and it's a worrying, troubling scene of 3 men gathered around a table, with in fact a moon still showing in the dimming sky of evening, and 2 or 3 stars out. And the man at the head of the table is plucking at his clothing, pulling it out and staring into the eyes of the viewer as if to convey an idea. Meanwhile, the 2 men at the table are staring at each other and they're embracing themselves. Each one of them is wrapping their own arms around themselves, and they look wretched, they look starved. And the table is turned up flat to the canvas plane, like those Giotto and Raphael, the early church art. And it remains entirely unexplained. And the back of their stools that they're sitting on, like chair backs, are actually tent poles. They're antique tent poles with the paint flaking off. And it remains completely inscrutable. It's a worrying painting for me, actually. I never paint men, and so this is an aberration and probably not one I'll return to. Yeah.
Is it something you're comfortable to discuss why it is that you're painting men for either the first time or on a rare occasion?
Men worry me. My father always used to say to me, "You'll never make a man," which didn't exactly insult me. I was just a little bit confused, really, by the idea of not making a man. I didn't even know what a man was, really. And since I've learned, more about the history of men, I've actually been quite pleased that maybe I won't make a man, when you look at the world at the moment and the proportion of men doing the fighting and the cheating, and the women, would they send their sons to war? Probably not as easily, So men worry me, and I prefer in my paintings, and in my life too, actually, I prefer the vulnerability of women, their vulnerability and their capricious quality. I mean, you can't generalize, but I just did, so generally speaking, I really love those qualities. And yeah.
There's always an incredible sadness and vulnerability to the subjects of your paintings. And I wonder, have you ever been likened to Katy Kovitz for that area of kind of art to explore that kind of sadness and grief in that way?
I haven't. I mean, maybe I have, but I haven't heard that. And I actually don't see it that way. But then, often completely crazy people are surprised when someone calls them crazy. And so, it comes as news to really. And so, what I see actually in my paintings, and I have to say that I believe that the universe is inherently meaningless, but that doesn't mean that it's not significant and wonderful and completely beautiful. But when a baby is born, no one says, "What does this mean?" They hold the baby and say, "What does this mean?" Everyone will read that human being differently all the way through its life, just like the crazy person. Everyone will have a different take. And our interpretation is truly ours, isn't it? And we bring our interpretation and we invent a world that we then live in. So as for the absolute truth, I really don't know. So my view, and by saying all that, what I'm really leaving to the viewers is the sacredness of their own complete interpretation of my paintings. That's theirs, and I love it. My view is that life is everything, and that when you embrace someone, you're really embracing everything that they have been. So you're embracing the fact that they were born in blood and will die. And you're embracing the fact that they have danced and laughed and loved, and they have longings and sweetness that is beyond any measure, and regrets and terrible fears. And when you embrace them, you embrace all of that in every single human being. And so the paintings are very complicated only in the way that human beings are complicated. There's not a single person that isn't very complicated. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I have heard you say this, and I think it speaks to a lovely connection to humanity, which I think is curious because of how you are so open about the difficulty of your relationship with your father. I wonder whether this is all from your mother, that you have this amazing love for the world and this understanding and empathy for all people, and see this kind of whole lifespan in each embrace. Is this, do you think, in any way related to who your mother was as a character?
Well, to speak to that, I really don't think I'm anything like as sweet as you're making me out to be. Actually, I mean, I do. I do try to treat every human being I come across as a sort of a family member, but not because I'm in any way virtuous or particularly sweet. It's just that I believe that to be so. I simply see it as a fact, that we are really one family. As for my mum, she was probably as troubled as my dad, but she was really easy to get along with. And it was really me and her versus my dad. And so there really was a camaraderie with her. But she put herself over as really a very simple woman, someone obsessed with cleanliness, actually. Literally obsessed with cleanliness. So the house was bleached to within an inch of its life, always. So just, yeah. Again, complicated.
Yeah, it's very true. Well, it's interesting as well. I feel as though I should ask you about this definition of manhood that you mentioned earlier, of being a man, because that is another blurry definition for, I think, a lot of people who try to suggest that it's cut and dry, but you always hear you're not a man unless you and fill in the blank. And I've heard all sorts of things. So is this something which, do you see in modern times this being wrestled with and redefined around the idea of identity more keenly now than you've seen before, or is it an ongoing conversation in your opinion?
In the world generally, do you mean, Simon?
Yeah.
I think in the West we often tend to call the Western society the world, and assume that what's going on here, is going on all over the world, and America is particularly culpable when it comes to that, because really the world kind of stops at the United States shores. That is the world, and I think it is not necessarily the case in many other cultures. However, I mean, certainly in the West, it does seem that politically and culturally we are inexorably approaching a sea change. And men have been doing the driving. And so the destination we're at, surely the driver, brought us there. And it was mainly men. So I think a lot of young people are rightly really looking at the question of whether or not they want to get out of the bus, because they don't like where the bus is going. So they redraw their whole identity. And I mean, to me, really, and God, transgenderism and and all those other persuasions look pretty good, really, compared to the alternatives. Rather be that than a Marine. Oh, God.
Yeah. Well,
or kicking a ball around a football field, all of that,
No, I can completely understand. And the more people you know in those communities, the easier it is to become educated and broaden your understanding of that perspective and your own, really.
Yeah, it's much less blinkered, isn't it?
Yeah.
Plus, gay guys have a great sense of design.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Well,
so, yeah.
Because you mentioned America, I did notice that you have a strong connection with America as far as your art career goes. Where does that originate, and why is it that you have found, or not? Why have you found an audience there? How is it that's come about? I suppose, if I could ask it in that clumsy way.
Well, when my career started, and when I was talking to the university in Wrexham, Simon, I probably referred back to this as my origins, but when I was beginning my art career, it started with 25 multi-story murals in Wales and England, but mainly Wales. And then I did so many of those murals, up to 6 stories. And at a certain point, I decided, there's only so much you can learn from a mural. Because for one thing, you're in the wind and rain, and it's so large that glazing it and adjusting it is just impractical. It's very hard with the kind of paints I was using on these walls, all that. So I decided the thing to do is to pack up and go to the Caribbean and live on an island. And, live very cheaply, have a studio like Tahiti, really. It was in the southern Caribbean, and I lived there for 7 or 8 years, and raised our children there, and it was the best thing we could have ever done. And then I really concentrated on canvases, and as it happened, a few Americans, only a handful of them, started coming down to the island where I was, and they took an interest, and they began collecting my paintings and said, you really should come to the States. And I did, of course. And one thing led to another. And I then subsequently toured there for 20 years and lived there for 10 years. And my dealer is now in New York. Very, very good dealer. Previously Waterhouse and Dodd. Now they're called Modern Fine Art. And Ray Waterhouse and Sandra Waterhouse are extraordinary dealers. And they have an awareness of the world in terms of important collections to get my work, into. And so it all bloomed from living on an island. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. You'd have thought, well, let me work out how to really grow my career in the USA. What would give me the worst chance? Why not go to the Southern Caribbean and hide up in the bush? That would surely give me the least chance of accomplishing my goal. But actually, it was the other way around. Isn't that funny?
That's incredible. It is very interesting.
They found me under the nutmeg trees. God.
That sounds like the start of a poem or a good song.
Yeah, yes. It's a nice line, isn't
it? Yeah. But I'm very curious about your origin in your career being a mural. How did that come about? Why would you have how could you have the confidence to be so large in your art making at the very beginning of your career? I would have thought early on people start small and then eventually graduate to the larger scale work.
I think one of the sicknesses I have is romance. I'm incredibly romantic. And I write poetry to this day. I always have since I was a teenager. And another word for it is arrogance. Because romantics and arrogant people think enormously. They think of the whole vast possibility, you know. And honestly, when I went to college in North Wales, I mean, I had no skill really. I was 23 and I had no skill, but I had one skill, and it was the ability to say yes. So I just said yes to everything. I was asked to do a little tiny mural, 6 feet on a wall, and I said yes. And I learned as I went along. I quite simply did them. Then I got a little 2-story one and said yes and painted that. And the thing is, we naturally learn, don't we? So, I painted this mural and just walked across a pedestrian crossing to the other side and looked at it and said, oh, that's not quite right. And went back and adjusted, it was small enough to adjust. And then I got several 3-story murals and did them. And I just learned how to do it. And it taught me 2 main things. One was it taught me how to work. That's probably one of the most important lessons, isn't it? To know how to get up and go to work is huge. It doesn't matter how talented you are, how much skill you have. If you don't get up and go to work, nothing happens. So that's one skill. And the other skill was composition. And it was the fact that if you're going to put a mural on a 6-story building, you can't start sketching on the wall and then work it out as you go along. It just doesn't work that way. And so I had to immediately figure out that you've got to really, really figure out designs and get them to work and look good and have a nice evolution within them right from the beginning before you even go to the scaffolding. Yeah. So it was really, really useful. And it wasn't talent. I just said yes. That's all it was.
Well, did you use a grid system in order to make sure that things were proportionally accurate? Because when you're on such a large surface, it's hard to step back so easily and measure all of your marks. Is that what you
Yeah. So I did. I used a grid system. So over a 6-story mural, I used a 1-foot grid. So I've not worked that out, but I guess that's 2,400 squares. I suppose. 2,400 squares that would be on a 6-story building. And and it was really laborious, but it was the job.
And would we recognize your artistic voice in the work now, or has it changed significantly from those early murals? Has your subject matter changed, or your palette or anything like that changed significantly?
Well, there are always some things that I think we carry with us, and however much you learn and however much experience you get, there is a quality in forms and lines and color that never goes away, that remains recognizable in an artist's work, isn't there? Right from the very beginning, probably even when they're in their childhood, all the way through. So there is that. But I think as time has gone by, a bit like someone with one of those muscle cars. You keep adding things on, bolting things on to fine tune it. And now my paintings are really complicated. The way they're built is really complicated. And I need it. I need it because, everything I bolted on was bolted on for a reason. And yeah.
So if I may, it's what I wonder is as well is if you said that you didn't necessarily have any skill when you were at college in North Wales, then where did you learn this understanding of anatomy and the translucence of skin and this incredible proportion and perspective that you have now? Did you educate yourself beyond the college course, or was that good teachers with the foundations and fundamentals back then, or where did that come from?
I've had a huge education, actually. I'm really fortunate because I just ran into the right people or sought them out, sometimes. So there was a famous architecture abstractionist on the island in the Caribbean, quite by chance, Danish. And I learned from him. He really worked on me, actually. There was also a famous architect there who also worked on me, but on another aspect. And I spent time with Malcolm Lipke in New York, once I made it to New York, learning about color. And I spent time with Jan de Maar, the art dealer. He's now really highly trained in psychology and the psychology of perception and color in Brussels. I showed with him, and he took me into his basement, and he was trying to hammer into this young man who had no idea of color. He was trying to hammer in what I had to concentrate on. And he couldn't believe how little I knew. He was astonished. He'd grown up with art. I grew up with a plumber, and so he worked on me. And at a certain point, I studied Pythagoras for composition and studied in the museums, and it's never stopped.
Mm.
I'm still working it out, and it's a constant. Yeah.
I've heard you discuss how Pythagoras was the kind of the foundation of all true measurements in successful art, and if you put an unsuccessful piece into this kind of golden section where it could be more compositionally sound, then it transforms the work to an extent. Is that a fair way to summarize something?
Well, that's the least of it in a way, because the golden section actually is quite different from Pythagoras, because it is a perfect form with an absolutely magical proportion. It kind of astonishes mathematicians. It seems impossible, the proportion. And it was used in Greek architecture, and it is an extraordinary shape. And there are perfect forms, like the circle and the square, perfect forms in geometry. But Pythagoras worked out proportions of harmony. I think it was about 1500 years before Christ. I think so. I may have gotten that a little wrong. But what he did was he passed a blacksmith's shop and he heard the hammers, pounding away, and noticed that they were on different notes. And then he figured out that the size of the hammer, the smaller they got, the higher the note, and vice versa. Then from that, he began to work out that if you got two sizes of hammers perfectly correctly correct in their weight and their relationship, they were in harmony with each other. Otherwise, the notes rattled. So he built the musical scale from that. And all Western music, actually all music, all classical music, rock music, heavy metal, the whole lot, every time a heavy metal guy covered in tattoos, with those leather gloves with no fingers, and just goes on stage, he tunes the guitar according precisely to Pythagoras. Precisely. And then you add rhythm, and the rhythm also, is the metronome of organization of music, which runs on a timeline. Well, if you lay that timeline down like a row of harmonics, and you freeze that line and you stretch that line sideways so the lines of harmony go across to the other side, then you begin on the top like ploughing a field, and you plough that from top to bottom. You now have a two-dimensional layout of perfect harmony. And that gives you powerful points, magnetic points. And just as an orchestra never plays without every one of the instruments tuning up, apart from the wind instruments, I suppose, but all the stringed instruments, then you can create compositions, and there's no limit to the creativity of those compositions. But the same applies exactly to all visual art. And if you use the armature, the difference is quite extraordinary. It's just, I work with the armature on all of these paintings, not just to things like the lines of them, but often to the eyes, because they're so central in a way, and not just to the eye, but the pupil, and not just to the pupil, but the center of the pupil. I mean, they are just in tune, That's my theory, anyway. But no, that's demeaning the whole thing. It's not my theory at all. It's Pythagoras' theory. And out of that comes all art and all music in the Western civilization. So, yeah.
Well, I'm hoping that at some point you'll write a book, because this would be a fascinating read. And I think that would do very well for artists and musicians alike. I think even just people who enjoy the arts and culture would soak up this kind of connection and really get benefit from that. So I don't know, have you considered ever writing a book yourself?
I'd really like to write a book, actually. I write every day. I kind of need to write. It's one of those things that I can't get away from, because I use it to find out where I am every day. Writing is my way of finding out. But there's no time. My work is 7 days a week, 10 in the morning till 10 at night, and I just can't find a way out of that. I really can't. And honestly, if I did have the time and there was time left over, I think I'd put a band together. I do. I think I'd put together a band and go back on stage and do concerts and write music again.
So what do you play instruments as well?
Yeah, guitar and this and that, and sing, and I've had quite a few bands, and I really enjoy that. I love the camaraderie, and the whole. It's such fun.
Yeah,
the whole experience.
Yeah,
rehearsing and having the fun with the audience. Just that relationship with an audience is so alive, so thrilling.
It's something to look forward to. I think that's surely something you can work towards and try to
yeah,
see if there's space for that at some point.
it really is one of my dreams. Yeah.
And if you write every day, I'm curious, what type of writing is it? Because sometimes I myself will jot down thoughts or things from dreams or partial lyrics or something or other. Is it a combination or is it poetic? How do you write yourself?
Excuse me. It's different all the time. They often, the things I write, every time I post twice a day on social media, all the areas of social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and this and that. And I put a piece of the writing with every painting, not related to the painting, but they just dance together for that day. People often think, they must surely be related, but they're really not, except they both come from me, so I guess they are. But, and honestly, I write them and they sound like scenes from books. I can read you one, actually.
Oh,
they sound like scenes from books, and what they really are is me seeing the emotional landscape that's inside me on that day. That is what they are. So here's one from today, actually. This is really unusual. I've never read one like this, It seems to me that at that time, the piano was always in the air. Slow nocturnes late in the night, barely audible behind the library door, and gay little rural pieces through the day. Beethoven mid-evening, of course. No one could tolerate him in the morning. The piano walked our emotions like a groom walking a broodmare. We felt through the conduit of music. And when the rough men, the carters, rolled it up the hall on wheels, shrouded in an army blanket, I stood about with my hands in my pockets, feeling a loud kind of fear. But then it was only me in the old house.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. That was
Pleasure. Terribly melancholy. Sort of beautiful and melancholy.
I see how you mean it. It reads like a scene from a book. It's fantastic. Absolutely lovely. Yeah, you must publish.
I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, yeah. Let me think now. I'm going to struggle to follow that up with a question because that's just wonderful. I'm curious about your protege as well. How did you come to meet this person who's the husband of your model?
In an interesting way, because for many years I worked with a lot of galleries in 7 different countries actually, and I used to tour my collectors in the USA, and I spent 4 months a year on the road talking about the psychology and ideas in the paintings to groups of collectors in New York and Seattle, Texas, Florida, all over the States. And I really enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. They collected my paintings, and it was a lot of fun. And well, that went on for 20 years. And then in 2008, I was in the States and the financial crash happened. And literally, my market shut down. Gone. I mean, I went on a tour. It lost money instead of making money. I mean, it was just a disaster. So I thought, oh, well, what am I going to do? I just built a huge house, and so I had this massive mortgage and absolutely no means of paying for it. So I thought, well, why don't I get as many professional or amateurs heading for professional art careers and teach them what I've learned. Well, along came Brandon Campos, straight out of school, and for 5 years I trained him in pretty much everything I knew. But it had, so I painted part of the time and I taught part of the time, but it had an enormous benefit, again, you know. And the benefit was, at a certain point, I mean, I ran so many classes, at a certain point, I ran out of knowledge. I mean, you know, there's a limit. You know, you spend whole weekends teaching, you do ultimately reach the end of your knowledge. So I thought, well, this is interesting. So I'm now going to have to start to learn. So then I learned. So half the time I was, or a third of the time I was just learning, teaching myself, learning, reading. A third of the time teaching, a third of the time painting. And it transformed what I do. I mean, if there was a benefit to come out of it, apart from paying the mortgage, the benefit was, you know, I came out of it knowing so much more. It was really great. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. The financial crash, isn't that funny?
It is. Well, I have to follow up though and ask, how do you introduce more learning when you feel as though you've got enough knowledge to have this career behind you and have the ability to gift others with your insights and observations? How do you then find more education when surely you're predisposed to view things within a certain lens based on your previous observations, I suppose, and successes? How do you find more learning?
I think what I did, I think actually, imagine living in a walled city, however large the city is. Every so often, you come to the outer wall and you're aware that suddenly the road stops here. And I think we all encounter the shape and size of the city wall in our knowledge. We don't always necessarily admit it to ourselves, but we do know when we come to that place and say, I actually don't know. In other words, I'm sometimes talking about things, about a subject, and it's fluff. It's unfounded. So I wonder what lies on the other side of that wall. But I'm too lazy, frankly, to find out. So I kind of started cutting holes in the city wall and extending the streets by reading and studying. And for example, we went to all the top galleries in New York. We made a trip, 2 months, 2 or 3 months actually, studying the galleries in New York, talking to dealers, looking really carefully at what they're showing and why they're showing and what's going on, and abstraction, Franz Klein, Robert Motherwell, Hans Hofmann, talking to the people that represent the estates of those artists. And then we did the same thing in Chicago and Aspen, Colorado, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and so on. And I'd done a similar thing in New Orleans, Louisiana previously, and so you learn. And the thing is, the learning is not just facts. It's not facts and information. I think facts and information are the very poor cousins of real learning. That's like saying, because I know your name, I know you. Your name is just information. So I can't pretend I know you because I know your name, Simon. And knowing the word color and knowing red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet means you know a fact. That's all. So from then on, you've got to cut a hole in the city wall and extend the streets and begin to open it up and look at Vuillard and Bonnard and Gauguin and, all the early colorists and begin to open it up and build, yeah.
Mm.
I think that's it.
That's incredible. Thank you. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Isn't it fun? Something I taught my sons was that I have very unusual beliefs about education. So I never allowed them to do homework. That was one thing. Because I think kids have had enough by the time they come home. It's enough. They do about 35 hours in school. Anyone that does a 35-hour job, any adult that does that has had enough. They need to rest and play now, So I believe that. But I also used to, if they got, say, 100% or whatever it was in a test, I used to say, oh, okay. And, show no interest at all. And if they failed at something, I used to kind of rub my hands and say, oh, how interesting. I wonder what it was that confounded you about that thing. Let's have a look. And so what I taught them was that failing is the best thing you can do. Bad marks are just such a blessing because it means there's still some juice in it. What's left? What didn't we get about that? This is really fascinating. So let's look at that. And then they noticed that, when they got good marks, I was just bored because there's no juice left in it. Okay, great. And so therefore, learning and education is completely unconnected to your value as a human being, whether you're good or bad, your value, all of that. There is no connection whatsoever between those two subjects. So I literally obliterated that connection. And so they grew up absolutely loving knowledge and feeling no connection. You see, the truth about it all is that in this universe, you and I know one speck between us of knowledge in an infinite amount of awareness of which we are both completely ignorant. We'll never overcome our ignorance in this life or in any other life. We'll never, So we have to be okay with it.
I agree. I think the best we can hope for is to know enough to know that we don't know very much, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We're all just at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Never leave that place. The starter's block in a race, we're still standing on it.
Mm. But are your sons, are they creative? Do they have any kind of artistic or musical inclinations themselves?
They both are actually. Yeah. They grew up on a tropical island in the Caribbean. But Dan loves music, and he was a natural with color and painting. Just a natural. Really amazing. He outstripped me, but he had the advantage of growing up in a home with a studio, painting studio. So, it's a different advantage. And music, he'll have an apartment with no more than, a bed and 3 sets of clothing. But there's always a piano, guitar, and other instruments in the apartment. Tom has always been very creative and a phenomenal painter, a very good painter, actually. And still to this day, he's making collections of paintings recently in the last year or two. But Tom is actually a physics professor in Oxford and runs the postgraduate program in Oxford for physics and engineering. And he calls Dan the bright one. Dan is employed by the Chinese government
Really?
on the subject of human voice recognition. Yeah, he worked with Microsoft, IBM, Johns Hopkins University, and he's now in Beijing.
Oh, wow, that's excellent.
Yeah, yeah, and loves China actually.
Yeah. Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it's becoming beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never visited myself. Have you been over there many times?
No, but I really must. I really must go and visit Dan. And yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be absolutely mind opening and
fascinating. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
incredible.
Accomplished so much.
Well, there are certain questions I should ask you before we run out of time, because on this podcast we have certain subjects we definitely like to probe for every guest, and one of which is the color palette of an artist, and ask them if they are willing to take us through the colors they use and how they got to the palette that they're currently using, if it is fixed as a palette. And would you do that for us? Have one?
With pleasure. Yeah. My palette. I mean, I learned from Malcolm Lipke quite important things in Jan de Maar. But I'm not by nature a colorist. And it is nature. You know, you can learn to draw like a photograph, anyone can, that has decent eyesight. But you can't learn advanced color unless you have the eye for it. It's inbuilt color, unlike drawing. But I was beginning on this collection of paintings in 2017, and then I came across the Ansa de Madonna, Raphael's altarpiece, in the National Gallery in London on a visit. I was living in Louisiana at the time, and I realized that what I needed was a palette that would talk to human vulnerability and human mortality. And Raphael and Giotto, their palette, it's called the Verdaccio palette. And so I needed that because the figures have this starved and penitent look that I love so much. I use that, though, as the foundation of my paintings, the Verdaccio palette. But the other thing I like about it is I wanted, just like in that little bit of writing, I love air and atmosphere and smell almost in a painting. I don't want a clean painting that you can just call art. A nice, slick, clean painting. I like it to stink of human life in a certain way. And the way I felt I should accomplish that is by narrowing the tonal range, shrink the tonal range, so that my darkest color in the Verdaccio palette is actually like a plain chocolate brown. Here it is. And and then I bring the lightest light down to a peppermint gray blue. And nothing exceeds that. Nothing goes past those. So I'm only using about half of the tonal range in my paintings. And what it does is create the sense of air. Quite simply because when you look into the distance in a landscape, every layer of hills becomes paler and bluer as it goes back, forever becoming the tonally mid sky color. The whole landscape eventually becomes the color of the sky, quite obviously, because there's more and more air between you and the furthest mountain. Eventually, like in the Rockies, when you approach them from a great distance, you can't tell that they're there in the beginning because they are the color of the sky. And as you approach, their tonal range gradually becomes more and more contrasty and they appear. So I wanted air. But what I do then is I use a lot of Damar glazes on them to layer the blood distribution in the skin, and the veins, the ligaments, where the lemon of where the bones come up to the surface of the skin, giving them that sense of human vulnerability. And so that is the foundation of my palette. But as for any other color, I'm limited. I'm limited because it's not my nature. Yeah.
That's incredible. That is fantastic. So is this been for a very long time you've had that methodology for the construction of your colors and your characters and your paintings? Has that been adhered to for decades, or is that something which is developed and become more of a limited palette over time?
Actually, for decades, I had the sense of it, and the paintings were kind of vaguely adhering to those principles. And so you could sort of see it in the paintings. They moved around a bit, in the palette. but those principles, they were there. But the thing was, there was so much that I didn't understand yet. And I'd not even heard of the Verdaccio palette until 2017. So I knew kind of what I wanted, but I didn't know the mechanics of what I wanted. And now I'm just more aware of the mechanics. Because one of the principles comes from the colorists, and it's this, that, when we were in school, do you remember those little paper things folded up that the kids used to use, that you do this,
Yeah.
that? And used to pull things up and, read. They tell your fortune gun,
Yeah.
lucky number, your color, and all that. Well, the way those little things work is that either those two sides come together or these two sides come together. That's how they work in that folding of paper. Well, it works the same in tonal value and color. And the colorists adhered to this very firmly, probably after doing it wrongly and discovering, oh my God, what a mess. And so what it was that the more color that you use in a painting in terms of chroma, brightness of color, so the more color and the more colors, plural, you use in a painting, the less tonal range you can use. So in other words, very colorful paintings cannot go all the way to black and all the way to white. If they do, it looks like a pizza. They have to limit the tonal range. So, for example, when you look at a Paul Gauguin painting in a book, usually the printer has compensated. So they've said, oh my God, looks terrible on the page. It does. So they brighten it all up. They brighten it, they increase the contrast, and basically deprive Gauguin of the law he discovered. But if you look at a Gauguin in a museum, if you see it from a distance, and this continued into the 1930s and 40s, so the same applies to Sally Spencer's paintings. If you look at any of those paintings, they look unbelievably boring and uninteresting. And when you walk towards them and you're finally enveloped in their world, it's as if the color blooms like a rose and opens up before your very eyes. And your eyes become accustomed to the new tonal range, and the color is understandable. But it takes accommodating yourself to it, much like as it becomes evening. When at dusk, when you look at the world at dusk, if it became day, not gradually, but instantly, it would pretty much blind you. All these things occur a bit like when you enter a building in the middle of the day, a sunny, very hot sunny day. You go inside, you can't see anything. You know, it takes accommodating your eyes to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting principle, and it holds through all the colorist paintings.
Mm. Oh, that's incredible. I think it's definitely something I'm going to try and explore as well, because I'm fascinated with specific palettes, limited palettes like the Zorn palette and so on. So I think that's it's worth always challenging yourself with the tonal range being set, as you said, so that there isn't a whitest white. It's set to a much softer and more restful color, which I think is lovely. Yeah. Now, if I can, because we're coming to the end, I'd like to ask, how has your experience and relationship been with galleries over the years? Have you had a good relationship? Has it been difficult at times, or how do you feel about the gallery?
It's been difficult at times, and you know, they are human beings with all, you know, different personalities, just like artists. And one thing I discovered, generally speaking, was that many gallery owners are interested in the business, but really don't know much about art. They're interested in the business sufficiently that if the public don't know much about art, then the art they put on the wall doesn't matter as long as it sells. So whether the art is good or not when they're considering you doesn't mean you're any good. It just means they can sell it. Because after all, they do have to pay the rent and they do have to pay the staff. It's very, very expensive. So the 50% gets used up, you know, really fast in galleries. So it's been really patchy, Simon. I mean, all over the place, you know, probably every different way that a gallery can be, it has been. And just life, really. Yeah. And when there are misunderstandings, you know, contractual misunderstandings, I think when you're working with a gallery, we should never regard it as the end, because that would be like, you know, marrying someone. And when the first argument happens, you just say, oh, it's all over. You know, you would never sustain a relationship if you throw up your hands and walked out with every disagreement. That's ridiculous. And so in a relationship with a gallery is, hey, what are we doing, guys? If we want to make money, we better just grow up. Figure it out, apologize if necessary, and get on with the business, you know, just get on with the work.
Yeah. I should say, I mean, I've had some unfortunate interactions with galleries, but I've been fortunate enough recently to start working with a gallery, but not where I submit my artwork there. I produce videos for every exhibition of a gallery in North Wales called Finner Park. It's a very successful, wonderful gallery.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to meet Kevin Sinnott and some amazing artists through that gallery, and to see the selection process that the gallerist Ralph Sanders uses in order to create this narrative through the exhibition, and his relationship with the artists, and to try and be careful of how he discusses things, because artists are very focused on the work they've been creating. So they're obviously bursting with enthusiasm to present every piece they've been working on. And Ralph is sometimes in this point of trying to organize his thoughts for how is a show going to be made from some of the themes you've worked on and which ones shouldn't be part of the selection. So it's been an incredible education. I've been really grateful to be included in that process a lot. But it gives me more insight than I've had from the outside, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's lovely.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Congratulations on that. Kevin Sinnott is a lovely, lovely guy, isn't he?
He is.
Very fond of Kevin, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a real privilege to go and visit him and see his home and his gallery. And and to create the video. It was a very successful show, so I'm glad that he was happy as well. So that was really nice. What I should say is that now we like to obviously encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go and support the artist yourself, to go and see your work and to view it online, to purchase it. And because it's absolutely incredible work. It's, I told you that since I saw you do a talk for my university, I've really admired and studied your work for years and thought it was just absolutely beautiful and such powerful emotional work. So I do really encourage everyone to go and see your work and to support you in every way possible. Where is it you would like our viewers and listeners to see your work? First online, and then I'll ask in person. So what online platforms would you like them to visit?
I'm honoured, by the way, Simon. Thank you. It's me that's honoured. Well, I would say online. Just find me on Instagram. I'm easy to find, and I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So that's where it is, sort of online. I've got a good website too. It's just Edward Povey, www. Povey, and then the current physical work is at Modern Fine Art on the Upper East Side in New York. And they're at the art fairs presenting me very, very well. And actually, alongside Chagall and Picasso and Eric Fischl and all kinds of wonderful people, I'm the little boy tagging along behind, holding the hand of masters like Chagall. And then the remaining mural, the remaining mural that's really worth going to see is in the University of Wales in Bangor. And it's in perfect condition. It's a 20 by 40 foot mural, very much resembling Stanley Spencer in its quality. And that's one I really enjoy. I used to, when I lived in Bangor, if I had dear friends visiting, I used to show them the mural. And they used to say, oh, great, when can we go? And I would say, well, come to the university at midnight. And so they used to come to the university. I'd tell the guards, they'd be coming in kind of late. And so the guards would call me when they came to the guard place. And so I used to come out and get them and lead them down a long, dark hall in this 100-year-old university. We go through these squeaking doors, and then I would take them into the hall with a big candelabra, and I would show them the mural with a candelabra so they could see the faces of the figures. And I had one of those big old boom boxes with a good bass, and I put on Verdi's Requiem and didn't say a word. Verdi's Requiem. I had seats set up in front of the stage, and they would sit down, and I would show them these ghostly figures as the Requiem played out, and that is the way to see it.
That sounds absolutely mind-blowing and very romantic, as you mentioned earlier. That's the way to view.
It was lovely. Yeah. Art is living. It's not a picture on a phone,
No.
It's a living, physical, soulful thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds absolutely incredible. Well, I have to say, all of the links for all of your social media and for everything, and also for things we didn't have the chance to discuss, like the Kathleen Nordorf book that she will be. Well, I'll send the link that you sent to me.
Yes.
Because I was going to ask you about that. There are several things I neglected to ask, I'm afraid, but there will be the links in the description to the video. So I encourage any any viewers or listeners to check the description for all of the links and to explore all of these lovely places online and obviously in person if you are able to view it. But I'm incredibly grateful. You've been so generous with your time. It's an honor to have you on. Thank you very much, Edward.
Thank you, Simon. It's been my pleasure. Yeah.
hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.